Suggested I could speak on the news media and COVID-19, which there's quite a lot to say on that subject. But he had come with a clear theme in mind and a more challenging one for which I had to do some work. And it was his title, and I accepted it: Bridging News Media and the Next Gen. Because as with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the behavior of the next gen. Although I'm not comparing it in terms of negative effects, but the uncertainties are great and very, very complex. And there's a lot of good things with the next gen, but from a media standpoint, there is also a challenge and certain things that lower your morale. I'll come to that in a minute. But first, I want to put on record, you can't take it for granted, why we should value the news media and journalism. In the old days, we used to take it for granted. Everyone assumed that the media were inseparable from democracy. When you talked about the news media, it was taken for granted that it was a part of any democratic system, an independent and relatively free news media, and along with it, the journalism that came with it. But today, I don't think you can take it for granted. You'll have to advocate your case for valuing it. And so I just want to touch on these subjects because there's not enough time to elaborate on each of these aspects, but I think I should touch on these. The reason we should discuss this subject is the first reason is the intrinsic relevance and value of journalism as a democratic craft. So the question arises, what is journalism? As it has evolved in modern times, is best understood, and there are many definitions, but a handy one is it's a form of expression or brain work that includes making news judgments, gathering evidence, constructing narratives, and making sense of things. And it can be seen as a method of capturing and representing the world of events and ideas as they occur. A bit of a tall claim because nobody can represent and capture the world of events in any comprehensive or even an adequate way. We can only try to do our best. But that's what the aspiration and aim are. The journalism, what is the relationship between journalism and the news media? The two are closely related, but they should not be conflated. It's very clear. Because you could have a situation where the news media are buoyant, are in a buoyant mode of growth, and yet the journalism is nothing much to write home about. Quality may suffer. On the other hand, you could have a situation where the news media are under stress, particularly economic stress or political stress, and the journalism can be excellent, can be outstanding against the odds. So that relationship is quite complex. They are closely related. For good journalism, of course, you need growth, you need revenues, you need news organizations to have the ability to employ people, to train them, to employ quality, to invest in technology and other infrastructure. But the relationship is not one-to-one. They cannot be conflated. That's a point to remember because very often people use news media and journalism interchangeably, which should not be the case. As a sort of trade-off for robust and far-going freedom, which we claim, freedom from all forms of prior restraint especially, as a sort of trade-off for this freedom that we enjoy to some extent, although that is coming under pressure in many countries, including the United States, but I'm speaking primarily about India. It has come under pressure, as anyone who reads newspapers or follows news television or follows digital news can easily understand the kind of attacks that there are. Journalists have been killed in India, they've been attacked, it has been tracked. They've been arrested for things that have seemed perfectly innocuous, for social media posts and so on. But The Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression in Article 19(1)(a), and also the freedom to do a trade and so on in Article 19(1)(g). So our formula is freedom of the press in India is 19(1)(a) plus 19(1)(g) minus the so-called reasonable restrictions placed in law. It has to be in statute under different heads. I don't want to go into details, there are lawyers who know much better about it, Mr. Shivkumar, Murari and others. But the point here is, as a sort of trade-off between the freedom we enjoy, not adequate, but the freedom we enjoy and claim, the trade-off is between that and what is known as social responsibility, which is hard to define or put your finger on, but basically social responsibility can be formulated in terms of standards of performance, standards of ethical and professional standards that are up to the mark. There are many textbooks and codes that embody these standards. This, I think, is something worth noting. I've already mentioned that freedom of the press, freedom of the news media has come under pressure in many countries, of which India is a prominent example today. So the question is, this journalism, how do you value it as part of democracy, as part of democratic institutions and assets? The second reason for discussing the state of journalism today is to offer a reality check so that young people who are drawn to journalists, the Asian College of Journalism was mentioned, year after year, we get a large number of young people from different parts of India, predominantly women, 65 to 70% often, women who come there. Why do they come? Why are they drawn to journalism? It's not obvious that this is the most rewarding profession when it comes to remuneration and so on. But for some reasons, which continue to surprise us, they come. They come with idealism. They come with a lot of expectations. Why are they drawn to journalism? A reality check must be done on this because, as has been mentioned by Mr. Shivkumar, this period has been quite tough. Not just, I think, the pandemic, but even before that, in the digital age, the mainstream news media, starting with newspapers, but also other media, have come under tremendous pressure. The business model, which used to work very well in the second half of the 20th century, has collapsed. That the business model was newspapers were financed by advertising, subscriptions also contributed, but you could subsidize the price of a copy of a newspaper through advertising, and it led to very profitable enterprises and organizations. That model has collapsed, and the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has exacerbated this impact on what was already a declining trend. The third reason why we need to discuss the state of journalism has to do with the economics of contemporary journalism. I just touched on that. We're talking about digital disruption. It was first experienced by the mature media markets of developed countries and has spread at varying speeds to other parts of the world, including developing countries like India. In fact, we had a big advantage that the internet age dawned very slowly on India, came very slowly to India. Although the rates of growth have been high, it started with a very low base. But today, the gap between at least the middle-income countries and a country like India, that gap has virtually disappeared. And we have a very large number of internet users. Something about over 750 million is the figure I see in the official data. Whether that's actually true or whether these people actually use the internet, whatever it is, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people who are using the internet. And as I've already mentioned, to the decline and fall of the well-established 20th century business model. We could discuss this. I just wanted to touch on this theme before launching into the subject, the challenging subject that was assigned to me by the President. I think you need a conceptual framework for journalism. But before that, you need to look at this contemporary setting. I've already mentioned that news media and journalism are two related but different things. In critically assessing news media roles and performance, we need to make this distinction, namely a distinction between the state or fortunes of the news media industry and the issue of and the state of journalism, by which I mean its relevance, its quality, its social responsibility, and the trust that this journalism enjoys. And as I noted earlier, these two states tend to get conflated in public as well as media marketing discourse. The pandemic has had a huge impact on the news media, as it has had on lives, health, and the economy, and on social and cultural life across the world. It has disrupted the operations of the news media and slashed revenues, especially advertising revenues for printed newspapers. The crisis also seems to underline the trustworthiness, this is the positive side, the relevance and value of professional journalism, wherever it has been allowed to be relatively independent, wherever it has not been suborned or turned propagandistic. There's some interesting research brought out by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. It's it goes back to 2021 on digital news. And so I just want to highlight some of these findings because they also apply to a large extent to India. Not always, but to a considerable extent. And these are the findings. Trust in the news media has grown in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. This reverses to some extent recent falls in average trust. The trust gap between the news in general and news found in aggregated environments, that is search and social environments, has grown. Audiences seemingly placing a greater premium on accurate and reliable news. In several countries, especially those with strong and independent public service media, India is not one of those countries, unfortunately. We don't have a strong presence of independent